Okay, thanks everyone for being here. Thanks so much to Robert and Aaron for inviting me and putting on what's actually been a really, really great conference so far, and seems like it's gonna keep being great. So my name's Ethan Edwards. I'm a researcher in the Experiments in Art and Technology Lab out at Nokia Bell Labs in Murray Hill, New Jersey. It is the same Nokia that made your phones, the same Bell Labs that did all the transistor stuff. They merged. We're a little bit different now. Anyway, what my job is we typically are working with the larger artistic community to bring them in, work with our engineers, sort of stimulate creativity, get different ways of thinking, different ways of doing research. I'll talk more about that later. I am going to, in fact, even more oversimplify some of the data science things, so be ready for that. So, talking about data, data sets are actually pretty important for what we want to know and what we want to do. On the left is a data set for just weather data. On the right is stock market prices. The stuff on the left is what helps me determine whether I'm going to take an umbrella out each day. And the thing on the right actually has a lot of power over our lives, even if we don't have a lot of control over it. It's helpful to know these things, and it's helpful to understand them. So there's a bunch of different ways we can understand them, the ways we can make decisions, think through them. And one of the ways that's been particularly successful recently is gradient descent. This is the fundamental technology behind the whole AI boom that we're currently going through. To be able to take very large, multidimensional data sets and find ways that we can optimize them, that we can find through them, understand them in much deeper ways than we could before. This has been so successful in solving a lot of really hard computer science problems. Computer vision, translation, these things have been significantly improved by gradient descent, by being able to take lots and lots of data and really work through it in this new way. It also is AI in that a lot of these tasks have been able to do things that humans can do. We've never really been able to make computers that can recognize images in the same way. And in that way, it's tied to the previous symbolic AI in really trying to be like humans and maybe even be better than humans. Now, what this requires to work is some sort of truth, some sort of relation to the data set that it's learning from, which comes in the form of a loss function. Loss function, just very simply, is how your algorithm, your system, relates to the ground truth that's contained in the data set you've chosen. So you can see here you've got a red line that doesn't actually match up too well with those scattered blue dots. And the way that a machine learning system would learn this is it takes the distance between the line and the points and says, okay, I've tried this line, towards the top and towards the bottom, they're pretty far away. I can improve my error. I can find a better line. And it keeps trying different things, goes through that gradient descent process to find, I think, the line that we, as humans, all see. Now, this can do actually a lot of really good things, and what AI is particularly good at is taking things that experts can do that you need a lot of training, a lot of data to understand, but that it's hard for us to do, and it's hard for us to have access to those experts. So this is why there's a lot of people talking about medicine and law, where humans are really good at those things. We don't have AI that can do better than them, but we don't really have access to those experts as much as we should. So in terms of supplementing, there's a lot of promise in all these fields. They haven't quite panned out, and I think we've heard a lot about why they haven't panned out, but I would like to point to one really good, successful use of machine learning and AI, which is bird identification. I love this app. It's free. I have no association, made by the Cornell Ornithology Lab. Get to go through, take a picture of a bird, tells me exactly what kind of bird it is, and I go through it, and actually it helps me take the picture of the same bird a few times. I start to learn. I start to understand what the species is, be able to talk about the differences between them. This is a really good use, and this is not something that we were able to have before. I would say that what AI is best at, though, which we've seen, is advertising. of convincing people that it's really, really good and really, really smart and really, really human-like when it's not. We've seen, I mean, just from the other talks, you can tell that there's been a lot of research products that have come out making huge claims about what AI can do that don't actually really hold up to scrutiny. And part of that is because the gradient descent, this thing that's making everything work, is a little bit opaque. It does not tell us how it knows the things, right? There's this idea that in order to really explain something or to understand something, you need to be able to teach it. AI has not really been able to teach us, and often there's a huge gap between the results and it knowing something and us even being able to understand how it's doing it. One of the classic examples would be adversarial examples. Computer vision, we have incredible results, oftentimes better than humans, where it can just exactly identify animals in pictures. When you put another machine learning algorithm against it, try to figure out if there's ways it can be beaten, turns out it really can be. The image on the right, we all know that's a panda, but the AI is 100% fooled. So even though we had this enormous data set that was fed into the system, the loss function, determined this is the best way to do it, there were still ways around it. And it actually takes a lot of time and effort to find these gaps. Many people were very excited when computer vision first had these results that we've really understood what vision is. We've understood how the neurons work. And it turns out that's just wrong. The very similar example to the last presentation is Gaydar AI. I think a lot of people have heard of this paper. It came out in 2017 by Kosinski and Wang. And this paper took a data set of dating profile pictures and had sexual orientation as one of the factors, was able to predict with some degree of accuracy whether someone was gay or straight. And when this came out, a lot of people justifiably criticized it. There's all these problems with the selection of the data set, with just even the premise, with all these epistemological and ontological assumptions baked into it. But what I'd like to focus on is that this came out and it took kind of a while to be truly debunked in the way that we'd want it to be. In, I think, 2018, right, some Google researchers said, this doesn't actually look right. Here's some different things that could confound it. 2019 found an article where, okay, actually, if you blur out the faces completely, it's actually even more successful at identifying them. So just doesn't work. What's scary, though, is that the original paper authors were sort of saying, I think this might be something real, that we found either genetic factors or developmental factors that show in the physical construction of the face that are able to be detected by this AI. And the fact that this took 2 years, or just any time at all, is worrying. That's scary. And I'll also say that when doing research for this presentation, I was using AI-powered search engines. When you search about this, it comes up with a bunch of different articles. It still will show you the articles proudly saying this AI has figured it out. You'll get as well the things that say it doesn't, but that doesn't always work. And if there's anything that sort of public affairs in the last 4 or 5 years have taught us, is that people are not necessarily going to do the research, and that there's a lot of danger here. So we have a lot of really, really hard problems to solve in the world today. Things like climate change, our just economic situation, and there's a lot of folks who point out to these amazing new tools we have to understand large systems, to understand all this data. And we haven't really gotten to a position where we've got good solutions to any of these from AI. We keep hearing these claims, but when you take the time and energy to actually look into them, examine their claims, a lot of them don't hold water. And I want to look at what technology do we have that has really helped us to think, that helps us to tackle the deepest problems, whether those are scientific doing physics, mathematics, humanities, or whether it's large and structural, like the political things facing us today. And the best technology that humanity has invented to better think and to better solve things is the paper and the pencil, right? This is how you still do things. When I'm faced with a hard problem, I don't go to some new algorithm that we've invented in the last 10 years, because there's actually nothing that would really do that. I am quite a fan of the Feynman algorithm, which is that Feynman solved problems by writing down the problem, thinking really hard, and then writing down the solution. It's a joke, but there is actually something deep to this, that paper and pencil still allows for deep thought. And one of the other strong disadvantages we have from artificial intelligence is that it may actually prevent deep thought. That when you look at the Gaydar paper, when you look at Sophia, all these things, they're providing ready answers without any sort of explanation or process, and are also being sold to us by companies, by researchers who don't want us to examine further, who don't want us to look in. And that actually really can disrupt the deep thought that we need. I think we should really look deeply into ways that technology has helped us, and rather than focusing on answers, focusing on things that can better help us understand and to think. So just two quick examples. To go back to my original weather example, the weather maps are actually great. Meteorology is an extremely complex system that for millennia humans had no idea about. This is a crucial part of our lives we had nothing to do, and not only do we now know what the weather will be to a much greater degree of accuracy, but we even have these incredible visualizations of what's happening, of how these complex systems can be reduced in this very incredible explanatory way. Imagery and data visualization of all kinds are actually dedicated to this. It's about taking these large data systems and coming to understand them. And actually, we've seen a lot of projects at this symposium which are trying to take data sets and really allow people to deeply understand them, to not provide direct answers, to provide tools for better thinking through the problems in their disciplines. So at Bell Labs, what we talk about is not artificial intelligence as much as augmented intelligence. We want to use the algorithms and these different techniques not to replace human thought, but as much as possible to deepen it and to give us better tools for doing it. This is the Noodle project, which we've shown a few times, and it's sort of an alternative to search engines. Rather than showing you the most popular results on sort of a one-dimensional optimization, it's trying to create a networked graph that you feed in your own personal data set, and it helps you to understand commonalities between them. And this also is part of, I will acknowledge, a larger tradition of tools for thought. I think particularly the researcher Michael Nielsen has been doing really interesting work. Researchers from outside of the standard places are starting to look into these things. And a lot of times the tech is not so flashy. And that's what we need, is a focus on what we can actually do with this, rather than these systems which are very flashy but have this opacity which prevents us from really understanding or even doing anything with them. But all that requires a really good loss function. And as I've gestured to a few times throughout this presentation, a lot of what's important is the human sense of things. What we can acknowledge is actually the panda, or what we can acknowledge is actually a good result. We've seen policymakers, people in various positions of power who love optimizing for different metrics that when you have a deep humanistic examination don't actually hold up, aren't actually good. We're at a real risk in listening to just algorithms, listening to the results without understanding the process of actually throwing away our human sense of what's right and wrong. And that's precisely what we need to make these algorithms actually work, is to maintain that ground truth. And some of the best people who have been aware of the necessity of deep human understanding in AI systems are artists. I'd just like to point to two visual artists who I quite like, Mario Klingemann and Helena Sarin, make amazing visual art things that really have not been seen from painting and stuff. Both of these artists will very much acknowledge that the AI is not the artist here. The AI is not making the thing. They're using general adversarial networks to generate these images, but every epoch, every step of the process, they are using their aesthetic judgment to determine what's good, what's bad, what they want to see more of. And they're not trying to quantify that. I think that we're probably, if there is even any way to quantify it, we're very, very far away from that. But keeping the human in the loop allows these technologies to produce things that are actually really beautiful. We at EAT are trying to do precisely this, to include artists in our research process and to deepen what we understand about really ourselves through this. This is Sugwen Chung, a visual artist who's had a drawing practice for many, many years. She used some of our systems that actually learned from traffic patterns in kind of a smart city application. But she brought these robots, hooked them up to paintbrushes, and did a collaborative drawing exercise with them to work through it, understand it. And another huge thing we did was with the Beatboxer Reaps 1. He's absolutely incredible. He's the fastest measured diaphragm in the world, which is kind of a neat fact. What we did with Harry was we made this great free documentary series, We Speak Music. You can look it up on YouTube. And he wanted to work with an AI, to work with some sort of system that would deepen his creativity, not replace him. So we had a recurrent neural network trained on hundreds of hours of his samples of beatboxing, and it produced things that kind of sounded like him, but sounded still different, sounded fundamentally strange. And that's actually an example of the algorithm not being able to mimic him, and that being exactly what he needed. Because rather than trying to replace him, what he wanted it was to push him further. The sounds that it made were things that he hadn't ever tried to make. That pushed him further. It created a feedback loop so that he could deepen his creative practice through the use of this system. And most importantly, he was the human in the loop. He knows beatboxing, the system doesn't. He's able to determine what results he wants and what is actually able to inspire him to go further than he had been able to go alone. And so I might just show very quickly the result of that collaboration.
And for with VDM and this expression just
So thank you. We are about deepening human communication, and to do that, we're not going to solve it with AI. We need to keep the human in the loop. Thank you.